Every single day, ordinary people clock in for work, and some of them never clock out. These are not war zones or disaster sites. These are factories, job sites, and warehouses where real people showed up to earn a living for their families. So, the question you need to ask yourself right now is this: if the companies knew their workers were in danger, why did they let them walk in anyway? Day 9. That was all Steven Dirk had under his belt when he walked through the gates of the Caterpillar Foundry in Mapleton, Illinois on the morning of June 2nd, 2022. 9 days, not 9 months, not 9 years, 9 days. He was 39 years old, a father of 3 little girls aged 4, 5, and 12. And he had taken this job because he wanted to give his family something better. His partner, Jessica, had watched him leave that morning the same way she always did. She had no reason to think anything would be different. He was hopeful. He was careful. He was just getting started. The foundry was one of the largest of its kind in the country. Every single day, it melted over 1,000 tons of iron to make parts for heavy machinery. The temperature inside the smelting area ran at 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. That is hot enough to dissolve a human body in seconds. There were no guardrails around the crucibles, no safety harnesses, no second chances. Workers moved around open vats of liquid metal the same way office workers move around desks. Except one wrong step here did not mean a bruised knee. It meant something far worse. At just past 9:20 in the morning, Steven was given his task. He was told to collect a sample of molten iron from one of the massive crucibles. It was considered routine work. He walked toward the vat, the heat pressing against his skin like a wall. The air around the crucible shimmered. The iron below glowed a deep, furious orange. And then he slipped. Just one small, silent moment. His body tilted forward and he fell. Not all the way, but enough. His lower body hit the molten iron first. It was over before anyone could move. By 10:20 that morning, the entire foundry had been shut down and evacuated. When investigators returned hours later, they found only small fragments of bone. The coroner listed the cause of death as thermal annihilation. Steven's 3 daughters would never see their father again, and 6 months before Steven ever set foot in that building, another man named Scott Adams had died in the same facility. The workers had complained. They had raised concerns about the conditions, the heat, the lack of protection. Nobody listened. Nobody acted. And Steven Dirk paid for that silence with his life. Samuela Kira Vakayawa had traveled thousands of miles to start over. He was 40 years old, originally from Fiji, and he had left behind a painful chapter to build something new in Sydney, Australia. Earlier that year, he had buried his father. His marriage had ended. But Samuela refused to be broken. He had found work with A1 Arbor Tree Services, a company that managed trees across Sydney, and he had thrown himself into it with everything he had. He posted photos of himself smiling in front of the Sydney Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. His friends back home saw a man who was fighting for his future. The morning of September 7th, 2019 was a Saturday. Samuela arrived at Chorleywood School in Lernia, Sydney, alongside 2 co-workers. The job was straightforward. Clear branches, feed them into the wood chipper, move on. The wood chipper was a large, powerful machine with one purpose: to destroy whatever was fed into it. Stamped directly onto its body was a warning that could not have been clearer. Danger: do not hand feed this machine. Severe injury or death can result. The machine's own manual stated that a mechanical log loader had to be used. Not hands, not arms, a machine. It took less than a minute. Samuela kept working. He kept feeding the branches in by hand, alone, with no one watching, next to a machine that had already been flagged as faulty before that morning began. Nobody had pulled it from service. Nobody had told Samuela it was unsafe. He simply kept going because that was the job and he needed the work. Then the machine took him. In one single violent moment, it pulled him in through the infeed hopper and toward the spinning internal drum. There was no time to react, no time to call out. By the time his coworkers returned, the ground around the machine was covered in blood and Samuela was gone. The court later found that A1 Arbor Tree Services had failed to conduct a proper risk assessment, failed to keep faulty equipment off the job site, and failed to give Samuela the training that might have saved his life. The fine was originally set at $3 million and reduced to $2.25 million after a guilty plea. A man who had crossed an ocean for a second chance at life had it taken from him beside a machine that never should have been running. Natalia Nemitz was 36 years old, and she had a 10-year-old son named Ivan, who was waiting for her to come home. She worked at the Slaviana Confectionery Factory in Stary Oskol, Russia, a place that made sweets and candy products using large industrial machines that ran at extreme heat. She worked long hours. She never complained. She showed up every single day because Ivan needed her to. On the morning of October 20th, 2017, Natalia was assigned to clean one of the factory's large caramel mixing vats. It was a routine task, one she had done before. She had no reason to think that morning would be any different from the ones that came before it. Nobody saw exactly what happened. Maybe the floor was slick. Maybe the heat and the fumes made her dizzy for just a second. But at some point, Natalia lost her balance and fell into the vat. The caramel inside was boiling, far hotter than water ever gets, thick and heavy and relentless. The machine did not stop. Its industrial blades, built to stir and smooth the mixture, kept turning. By the time her coworkers realized she was missing and began to search the factory floor, what was visible above the caramel was only her legs. The rest of her was already gone. What happened next was not grief. It was not a phone call to her family or a call to emergency services first. The factory's management gathered the workers and told them to say nothing. Anyone who spoke would lose their job. There were no official reports filed, no public statement made. The factory wanted it buried, and they wanted Natalia Nemitz to simply disappear the same way she had inside that machine. Her son Ivan was 10 years old, and his mother had just been killed at work, and the people responsible were more concerned with protecting the factory's reputation than telling him the truth. But a local newspaper called Kurskaya Pravda refused to let it go. Journalists began asking questions, and investigators followed. What they found at the Slaviana factory was a pattern, not an accident. Workers had not been properly trained. Safety procedures were being ignored every single day, and Natalia was not the first. She was the third worker to die at that factory within a single year. 3 people in 12 months, and the factory had kept running without change, without consequence, and without warning, the people still walking its floors every morning. Nicholas Marks had been doing this job for over 20 years. He was 40 years old, a professional window cleaner in Boston, and he knew the risks better than almost anyone. He was methodical. He was careful. His colleagues respected him and looked to him for guidance. On October 23, 2023, he was working on the 32nd floor of the office building at 100 Summer Street in downtown Boston. Far below, the city moved through its usual morning. Taxis, commuters, coffee cups, open doors. Nobody on the street was looking up. Nicholas prepared his equipment and lowered himself into his bosun's chair to begin the descent. Then his safety anchor line snapped. The line that was supposed to hold him, the one piece of equipment standing between him and a 32-story fall, he had been worn and defective. OSHA investigators later confirmed that his employer, Sky Safety Incorporated, had not properly inspected the equipment, had allowed workers to use lifelines that were already damaged, and had not trained them to identify the warning signs before stepping off the edge. Nicholas hit a parapet wall on the way down with enough force to leave visible damage in the concrete. He never had a chance. Sky Safety claimed an unseen piece of metal had cut the rope. OSHA found no evidence of that. What they did find were repeated and willful safety violations, and the company was fined $447,000. Nicholas left behind 2 young children who would grow up without their father. 4 stories, 4 factories and job sites, 4 companies that knew. Every single one of them had been warned, had seen the signs, or had watched someone else die first. And in every single case, the fine came later. The apology came later. The investigation came later, but the workers went in first. So ask yourself this: how many more people have to die before the fine actually costs more than a life?